All righty. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today on a beautiful Friday afternoon after Halloween. Hopefully everyone survived it in one piece. We're honored to have Dr. Teraguchi here once again, who is the Executive Associate Dean of Admission and Student Affairs at the UC Riverside School of Medicine. Um, Dr. Teraguchi leads the School of Medicine admission and pipeline programs in addition to having an active role in student affairs at the UCR School of Medicine. Um, Dr. Teraguchi has over 20 years of experience in student affairs and a leader for diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts across several institutions of higher learning. He has served 8 years as Assistant Dean of Student Affairs and Student Diversity at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, as Associate Dean of Student Affairs at Elson Floyd College of Medicine at Washington State University, and at the Carle, Illinois College of Medicine in Illinois. In these roles, he created pipeline program, fostered holistic admission process, and developed new student affinity groups, all while maintaining a strong focus in creating an inclusive environment uh, for student success. He holds a BS in engineering, a master's of education, occupational attorney, and an doctorate of education leadership, all at the Idaho State University. We're glad that he's able to join us today.
Thank you for the kind invitation and introduction. Happy to be here. Happy to share some wisdom and perspective about particularly UCR School of Medicine, and I'll provide some general application feedback for folks. It's going to be interactive. I've asked Evan to help me manage if I ask questions, people put things in the chat. And as questions come up, we can pause at any point to make sure we get through some of them. I assume some of them might be clustered together. So let's get going. I'm going to not put it in presentation mode because when I do interactive stuff, I like to take notes on the PowerPoint. So it'll be in presentation mode for folks. All right. Hopefully you can see my presentation, right, Jovan? Good. All right. As I mentioned, my position, I'm also the Samuel Hyder Endowed Chair for the Thomas Hyde Program. I'm a clinical associate professor in the Department of Social Medicine, Population Public Health. My research really focuses on visual storytelling and graphic medicine. Today, we talked a little bit about UCR School of Medicine's mission. I'll talk a little bit about how it connects to the application process. I'll talk a little bit about the framework for being a competitive applicant and some questions. So let me start. Just see, it looks like you have a voting thing, so I'll just close that. So our mission at University of California, Riverside School of Medicine, our goal really here is to expand the physician workforce in inland Southern California. We'll talk a little bit about some stats here in the future. We really want to make sure they're trained around helping underserved communities and the diversity in this particular region. We often call them Jedi leaders, really looking at justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Also, with disciplinary training around public health education, preventive care. We also are trying to create residency programs for our shortage areas, including family medicine, internal medicine. We really want to make sure we're facilitating. We need care in all different specialties, but particularly these particular areas. We really want to help address the health inequities in our region, in the inland Southern California. Part of our stats here, you'll see part of the physician workforce. You'll see that for our area, the Inland Empire, the rate of 37 to 49 physicians per our population. We want to be around the 62 to 101. So we have a lot of work to do to get to the right ratio for our physician workforce. And as our physician workforce gets older and starts to retire, this number may certainly shift. So our very strong focus is to make sure that we get more physicians in this particular area in a rapid way. And so our medical school has a great history of students returning for match. We have a 96% match rate. We have over 80% of our students come back to California. Around 40 to 50% of them come specifically back to the Inland Empire. So we're very proud of that. And nearly 70% stay in Southern California. So this is a really great place to train and make sure you're connected to our community and stay here for the long term. All right. What does a competitive application look for? So these are the different components of an application: metrics, paid experiences, research experiences, unpaid experiences, clinical exposure, personal statement, recommendation letters, secondary application, and the interview. So this is going to be a little bit of the interactive part. From the people attending, what do we mean by metrics? And if nobody reacts, it's going to be a very awkward session because otherwise you'll be sitting here in silence. So what do we mean by metrics? This is Jobin. This is where I might need some help.
GPA, MCAT, GPA, MCAT. I would say quantitative data.
Anybody else from the people attending? Not quite a good list, but not everything.
Hours of experience.
Could be. When you say hours of experience, what do you mean by hours of experience in terms of what?
Clinical hours, patient interaction, volunteer hours.
Okay. So those are going to be things in other areas. So we're really thinking about metrics. I think this quantitative nature of things. So one thing is some people don't often think about is grade trends. Looking at grade trends. So what that means is particularly for first generation students that may not have the cultural knowledge, they may not have people in front of them with knowledge about the academic environment. Sometimes they struggle. They transition from high school, community college to four-year institution. All those transitions are often sometimes a little bit jarring, and you need to prepare. So when that happens, you don't get the grades that you would like to hope. And so we look for trends in those applications. So say you start lower and you have a trend up, that's very positive. You have up and down trends. So one time you did really well, and maybe a life thing happened. You had a sick family member. Maybe there was, something happens and your grades drop. So you really need to pay attention to your application because your application tells a story. So if you know there's some variation in your metrics, if you know that, gosh, when I first got in academics, I wasn't as strong, but now I'm finding my rhythm. You really need to make sure that you're aware of that because it's going to affect the rest of the application. So for example, if you know that you sort of gain momentum at the end of your academic career and will struggle at the very beginning, your rec letters become very important. You want to make sure you pick faculty that can tell that story. They can show your academic growth. They can show that you are maybe as a first-year student, community college student, as you transition, you weren't as academically ready as you had hoped, but you gained momentum, you got the mentorship, you got the support that you needed, and you really accelerated that might be there. You might decide to do a post-bac and get that there. So it's important that you recognize that. What you don't want to have is us as a mission committee fill in our assumptions about your journey. So as you think about these metrics, it's going to be really important that you understand what they are. So you have your GPA. So if you have a lower GPA, you might need a higher MCAT to counteract that. You have a high GPA, you can have more of a lower MCAT, and so they balance each other out. So it's understanding your own metrics and how your application works. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about paid experiences, unpaid experiences. What's the difference? How an admission committee might look at the difference between paid experiences and unpaid experiences. How would they differ, and why might they differ?
Responsibility. scope of what you can do, a job,
Say that one more time.
and scope of what you can do.
Um,
Paid experience may not necessarily be clinical, but uh, cultivative and other skills like customer service, for example. Unpaid experiences show interest. Unpaid are club duties, volunteering.
hmm. Let me ask the group this. Do you think an admission committee values unpaid experiences more or less than paid experiences? And why?
This is somebody else. Paid experiences may require additional certification and responsibilities where volunteer shows commitment to underserved. Well, you could get paid and do underserved community work. Um, the answer that you ask is it would be less for paid experience. They will,
So the general sense may be more important with the unpaid.
yes.
Yeah. I appreciate the dialogue. I think it depends. So say you are somebody that has to work your way through college and you don't have time for unpaid experience. It doesn't show any less of your commitment to what your passion is and your goal, right? So it's part of competitive application is telling your story. So say you really did have to work through school. You want to talk about how those translate to be valuable as you prepare. So if you're a barista, I don't know if any of you have been in community service, working with difficult customers, working with a diversity range of customers, working in a bureaucracy. I was reading, about Starbucks and, as they organize between unions and not really navigating empowerment. What does that look like for employees? So there's no value of one is better than the other. It's how you tell and translate that experience for the reader, which is the missions committee. So helping them understand. I think sometimes unpaid experiences that, gosh, I got to volunteer at this and do X, Y, and Z. I do think it's important to do have some unpaid experiences to volunteer. It could be with your church. And I think sometimes people don't list things that are very passionate in it because they might not see the relevance. You could be volunteer teacher at your church, working with some youth and teaching them X, Y, and Z. But that could be something that you put in there. Just that's very important to you. So there's no difference between the two of them. I think sometimes people feel like, gosh, I'm not getting paid, therefore it shows more of my commitment. That's not necessarily true because it's not always the case for everybody. It's really understanding the scope of what you're doing and how you're learning from it. How's that making you a better person? Translating those experiences to the missions committee to help them understand what are you learning from them. And it can be either one. Because not everybody can have a lot of volunteer experience. It's just not feasible for some people. But it is okay to have one or the other. And I think sometimes unpaid experiences can have a lot of value. Sometimes unpaid experiences are less structured. So you can talk about the uncertainty of them or navigating the pieces, the elements of them, the ups and downs of that. Where sometimes the paid experiences are much more structured just because of the nature of accountability and payment, what that looks like. So again, I would debunk the myth that there's more important or less important. It's really about how you package and you explain what they are. Let's talk a little bit about research experiences.
If anybody pays you for anything, they want a lot in return. Just throwing that out there.
Well, I think there's a different level of accountability per se, right? There's a level of accountability. There's a payment. There's an agreement of what that looks like. And I think even unpaid experiences, a lot of times there is a contract that is there, but the leverage of agreeing to that contract may be very different. So again, it's really helping understand the dynamics of the different experiences. Great discussion. What about research experience? What does that mean to folks? What does research experience look like? And is it essential to get into med school?
No, no answer is summer research experience. Feels like you can show passion for certain areas, which can be helpful. Somebody else says is not essential conducting a research experiment with a lab or professor. This person said they would say that it's important. Shows curiosity in pursuing a cause, and then they said depend on what type of research. Research may show critical thinking skills. Research shows increased ability to discuss and contribute to advancement. Getting hands-on approach in a particular field by showing your passion and curiosity. They also think that the quality or quantity is important.
That's great. Great answers that are there. So I think part of it is understand what research is. I like the notion of think of critical thinking, more general pieces. And I think some people overestimate the role of research. The language of research is what I mean by that. So some people are like, gosh, I got to get in a lab. And sometimes when you're in a lab, which is great, you can get experience, you get exposed. It depends what that experience looks like. So trying to understand how to translate those experiences. But sometimes in those labs, it's really a PA or a PI, a postdoc giving you a task and you do that task. And you don't really get a sense of the research process or the scientific methodology of that piece. So what we really want to know in the research process is, do you understand evidence-based medicine? Meaning, can you formulate a hypothesis? Do you understand what that means? If I said review of lit, understanding the literature, what does that look like? Can you formulate a question of a study, what you're trying to look at, what question, what problem you're trying to solve? Is there intervention? Do you know that it works? So it's really understanding a scientific process that will really benefit you in medicine and whatever you may end up doing. So it's that piece. So however you get that is really important. Some people get it through journal clubs. You can volunteer journal clubs where you're sort of articulating and evaluating different articles, looking at their methodology. What is their hypothesis? What are the gaps in their hypothesis? What are their interventions? So it's really understanding a methodical way at looking at a problem. How do you solve it? And how do you know what your intervention that you put in place is actually successful? And that's really important. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in a research lab at all, but it could be social sciences, it could be humanities, but it's really taking a project and understanding the scientific process of asking a question, hypothesis, the different components of that are there. So you can get it in a lot of different ways. So that's very important. And I think the notion of critical thinking, curiosity can be there, but it's also understanding the structure of evidence-based medicine. All right, what's the importance of clinical exposure? Why do you think admissions committee look at clinical exposure? And what does that look like for many people?
Can you guys put some of your questions in the Q&A so it's easier to keep track of them, and just put your responses in the chat because it's going to get lost. People are answering with patient interaction, exposure to patient care or interaction, experience with seeing patients, scribing is an example. To see if you really want to be a doctor, interacting with patients on different levels. You need to know the environment of healthcare area to know if you would spend 4 years training. Show commitment to medicine and knowledge.
Those are great answers. And I think that the heart of that element of that experience is, do you know what you're getting into? How do you know that you want to be a physician? A lot of times, pre-health students talk about, well, I really want to help people. Well, what's the difference between social work and being a teacher? You get to help people. How do you know that the medicine and being a physician is the right area for it? Why not a PA? Why not a nurse practitioner? What makes it about a physician to be there? So it's really understanding the notion of what medicine looks like and getting exposure. And it doesn't always have to be with patient exposure in the traditional sense. Many of you maybe have taken care or helped facilitate the care of a family member. Some of you may identify as from an immigrant family and have had to translate or help with a grandparent, a parent in that setting. So it's really understanding what that setting looks like, the role of the physician, why is that important to you? And it doesn't have to necessarily be in a hospital per se. You can work with, if you've caretaken, and at least at UCR School of Medicine, we really look at the holistic experiences. We understand and appreciate that not everybody can find a position. They may not know somebody where they can get that direct clinical experience, but they've helped a family member, or they themselves have been sick, and so they can reflect on that environment and why that physician would be. They can even talk about talking to other physicians, what it would like to be and what the role it would be. We do like some clinical exposure in the actual setting as best as you can. But when you don't have that, it's all about how to explain the experiences, that you understand what you're getting into, why it's different than other professions, and why it's the best fit for you. So that's part of the reason we look for clinical exposure. But we also understand it's not always possible. Clinical exposure, particularly in the inland Southern California Inland Empire, can be very difficult. That's one reason we need more physicians. There's not enough clinical spots, and there are a lot of individuals trying to train under physicians, and sometimes it's just very hard to get in that clinical space. I'm going to skip personal statement a little bit here. And Jovan, are there any Q&A questions that I should answer just generally that are coming in as we pause?
Yeah, they want to know would for classes like organic chemistry, bio, involve scientific count as valid lab experience for applying?
Sure. It's all about you translating. So what did you learn from the lab? So if you put that in there, there's certainly prerequisites that you need to have for different medical schools, particularly ours, and how lab fits. But what did you do in the lab? How are you translating that experiences into what might prepare you for medicine? Did you learn to develop a hypothesis? Did you evaluate an intervention to see what worked or didn't work? So they're all, any experiences can be valid. It's how you tell the story of what you gained from it.
Other question is for clinical exposure, does the discussion about paid versus unpaid also apply, or is it really important to get both paid and unpaid clinical experience?
It doesn't matter whether it's paid or volunteer. It's really getting the exposure. So if you're a paid scribe, obviously you get that exposure. You get to see the clinical setting, what the physician does as the scribe. But it also could be volunteer. It's really, just remember, the intent is not necessarily the number of hours. The intent of that experience is understanding you're understanding what you're getting into, and that you understand it and how it might be different than other professions, and that you find that being a physician is the perfect fit for your career aspirations and what you want to do. So it's less about whether it's paid or not paid and what the position is. It's about understanding what you're getting into, and that you understand that there is no other profession that is going to be the fit for your career aspirations.
Can you guys put your questions in the Q&A, because I can't see them in here, and I'm going through there. So this is another question. They want to know, what does having a unique clinical or research experience matter?
I don't know what the unique part is, but
Yeah.
I think just explaining it, whether it's unique or not, I'm not sure that really mattered. Like I said, with the research, it's understanding processes and understand the scientific process, what that looks like. When you talk about uniqueness, I would say if you look at uniqueness, is the personal statement. How do you stand out? What experiences? I think this is where you have to be. I mean, the word is in the statement, personal. I think some people become very generic. One of the biggest mistakes of personal statements is people start listing their experiences. I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that. Right? It's a repetition of their resume or their CV. This has to be very personal. What is your story? What are your values? How do we understand who you are? So when I worked with different applicants, it's sometimes the natural inclination is to really look at a list of different activities. So my story that I often tell, I interviewed a student applicant. We met for 20 minutes, and they went through and they listed all these activities they did. If I closed my eyes, I couldn't tell them different from any other applicant. They just had all these different activities. But when we're talking, they mentioned they were pretty shy. And I look at their resume, and they had biked across the country. And I said, well, that's interesting. They never brought that up in their interviews. I asked, why did you bike across the country? And she said, so if anybody's biked across the country, you can't be shy because you're asking strangers for help. People are helping you navigate that long journey. They're giving you food, all these kind of things. And she said, I had to test that I could overcome my shyness before I went to medical school. So I thought biking across the country, it really would push me to see if I could overcome that. And it did. And not only did she once, she did it 3 times. I learned more about her character in that little story than her 20-minute interview. So when you get to that personal statement, that's where the uniqueness comes out. How did your journey, if you identify as a first gen, if you identify as an immigrant, how did that inform how you're going to practice medicine? So some of you, you know, if your family, if you had to translate, how does that inform how you're going to practice medicine? Why is it so passionate that you work with certain populations and the impact that you have in inequality, and really want to factor that into your personal statement and your uniqueness? I was working with a student. She is a child of 2 physicians. And sometimes a child of 2 physicians, they are seen as they have a lot of these opportunities. And so it was very interesting to tell her story because she talked about how dysfunctional her family was, that her father was never home, that she didn't understand the sacrifice that he was making for the patients. So she was actually very upset about the whole medical industry. And as she's growing up, her parents get divorced right through this. There's a lot of turmoil in their family. And then, she's sort of resisting medicine because she sees how they impact her father, but there's sort of continual pull that she wants to help people. So as she goes through college, she really looks at helping particularly older people and hearing their stories, making those connections, particularly when you go to palliative care, really appreciating their life stories, making them very comfort, valued, listened to as they transition. And she realized when she was volunteering how hard it was to go home. There was always somebody else's story to listen to. There was always somebody else to help with. There was always somebody else that's going to be there. She then truly understood her father's sacrifice to the patients. She didn't understand it then, but she really understood it then. And that she understood that she was ready to make that same sacrifice that she actually was upset with her father about. So, that tells so much about their insight about medicine. And that's where that clinical exposure parts come back, right? So that you understand what it might look like in terms of the career. You have a family. Many of our, if you're from Southern California, because of high cost of living, there's often 3 generations in your home. How are you going to navigate those demands of medicine and your family dynamics? Some of you might be the oldest child. How are you going to work with your siblings who you mentor them all the time? Be able to navigate and understand what that sacrifice means as you go into medicine. So that uniqueness, that insight that you understand what you gain to can be very valuable, rather than if you said, well, I was a founder of this, I did this activity, I volunteered at a free clinic. But what did you gain from that? What did you learn from that? Even from the free clinic, maybe it's not about the patient, it's about the complexity of delivering healthcare, the bureaucracy of medical records, navigating insurance, why patients can't get into social services, why they only go to the emergency room, why are they going to the free clinic? Because they don't get long-term care typically from these free clinics. You want to be able to get them into case management so that they're getting more long-term care. So that's where the uniqueness comes in, and you start pull that out. So if you have unique research, maybe it's targeting a particular area of a disease, and it could be the innovation of asking new research questions. So for example, we have some students at UCR School of Medicine that are going in dermatology, and they're looking at sort of different skin tones and what does that look like for different diseases. Asking questions that maybe other people may not ask. And I think that may be the uniqueness to some of the research that might be there. What are the questions that we need to be really asking for different populations that might not have the voice in the medicine right now?
The other question is, and I would just add is like, what's unique to you? Like, one thing, is unique to a certain person versus another thing. Like if, I know if you don't like being in a really high stress situation, then the emergency is not probably something you want to do versus if you like building rapport, working or volunteering at a clinic might be more your thing. So I think it's just somebody is asking about virtual shadowing and how's that viewed?
Uh, I think it's more what you gain from that. It depends what the virtual shadowing is. It's what you're learning about the environment. I think it's really being able to actually talk to the physician. What do they do? How do they interact with the patient? So I don't think, like, many of my responses can be, what are you gaining from it? Is it good or bad? It varies on what the experience is and how you're translating that into understanding medicine, how it's informing that you understand what it might look like. And if you think about medicine, most of the time you go to the hospital, it's not for positive things, other than maybe having a baby. It's usually going for difficult things. So how do you navigate those difficult conversations with family? If you're working with pediatric oncology, I was talking to somebody that, many times their patients don't live till adulthood. And so understanding what that might be, working with the family, understanding what that looks like, to looking at family medicine, looking at the scope of the family longitudinally, what that looks like from them, having family members pass away to different difficult diseases. So the virtual doesn't have a necessarily negative impact, but it's how you're being exposed and what you can take away from it.
Awesome.
All right, let's talk a little bit about, hopefully I answered a little bit about personal statement. Really, you got to lift out your story. Oftentimes I will ask a student, if you had to title your personal essay, what would the title be? And if they can't answer that question, it means it's not telling a story. It means they're trying to do I can tell everything under the sun of what I did, but not create a theme about who I am and what I stand for. And so it's really about your principles and your values and your passion. So you need to tell a story, like the story that I told you about was before. It's about the sacrifice of medicine, and it holds the story all together. If you begin to talk about personal statement and just start listing things for the reader, it doesn't tell us the insights of what you're learning about medicine and who you are. Recommendation letters can be very important. You really have to be honest and open about what your application looks like. So if you know you have some weaknesses, it's important that your rec letters help address some of those. And I mentioned early on about the metrics. If you know that your academics are not stellar, making sure you choose recommenders that really help give insight to what that looks like. They may say, gosh, when I met so-and-so, they were in a place that they weren't as comfortable asking for help. And so they've matured over that particular time. And now they do X, Y, and Z. They're in my lab. They do X, Y, and Z. They take initiative. They ask for help. They are eager for feedback. They take that feedback and really accelerate. So it's really making sure those recommendation letters tell a story. And you should always be comfortable asking recommendation letters. Can you provide me a strong recommendation letter? Most faculty that if you ask, they say, well, I'm not sure I know you well enough to do a strong recommendation letter. So you need to understand whether they feel comfortable advocating for you in certain ways. Some of you, we talked a little bit about maybe not having unpaid experiences, volunteer experience, but in the clinical. They can help tell your story. They can help validate things that are there. Oftentimes we look at, does this recommendation person know you beyond this small sliver of how they may interact with you? How have you engaged them in that way? So these recommendation letters need to look carefully across what you are trying to put together in your application. And sometimes you can put like a non-traditional or somebody like a community member that gives you character, but you really want to make sure you're choosing wisely. So if you have 3 letters from a biology faculty or all in the sciences that all tell the same story, that may not help you as strongly as you get a diversity of letters. You might have one that talks really strong about your academics. Some might talk about your commitment to medicine and your exposure to clinical and really understanding the operations of medicine, and that you really understand the value and the responsibility of being a physician, and say that you are ready to enter the stage of medical education. It could be somebody that talks about your community service, your commitment to the leadership that you've had, your maturity, your growth, the longitude, your nature. I've had students provide a teacher that they had in high school, and they've been connected with them, and they see their growth from high school to undergrad, and maybe other areas they've been. So be very intentional what story you're telling with your recommendation letter. Some people say, well, I'm just going to do 4 science recommendation letters, and they may all say the same thing. They are good academically, but we don't get to know very much about you and their role in knowing about you. So these can be very important how you choose your rec letters. Secondary application. This is where you need to do your homework. All medical schools, if they do a secondary, it's their application. It's your opportunity to answer the questions that they find important. So make sure you pay a lot of attention to this. So what happens a lot of times in an application cycle, you spend so much time on the personal statement, you submit all your application, and then you get this wave of secondaries. So making sure you're getting ready for the secondaries. I know there's different websites that give you secondary information. They might change from year to year, but making sure that you're also working on those, because these become very important. We really look at them. What is your commitment to UCR? Those are things you really need to pay attention to. Sometimes if you don't pay attention to these, I'll write it like I write an email. I'll get the prompts. I'll just quickly respond to them. I encourage you to make sure you spend a lot more time on these secondary applications, because they are specific to that institution, and they often value them not more than personal statement, but it does layer what that looks like between these 2 applications, because obviously you're applying to all medical schools here. This one is going to be about that specific one. So if you're applying to UCR School of Medicine, know our mission really well, and make sure your behavior in your secondary application say, I'm committed to underserved populations in the Inland Empire. Make sure all these things about your experiences reflect that, what that looks like, as well as your recommendation letters. So,
Question:
I'll pause there to see if there's other questions.
where do you find information about UCR School of Medicine?
You can go to our website. You can go to our UCR School of Medicine admissions. You can see all our requirements, our focus. You can check a broad scope of our medical school. Encourage you to sign up for our social media, I guess not Twitter anymore, whatever the name is, all the different social media, so you can see all the events that we have, be connected, see what were most important to us. So definitely go to UCR School of Medicine or admissions. You type that into Google, it will come up with our admissions website.
Yeah, I would just say that if you're filling out your secondary without looking at a school's website, I think you will be really harming yourself. Just a personal opinion, not, you know. The other question is that has come out is sorry, they want to know how long are the secondaries for medical school?
It can vary between school. They can have a series of short essays. They could have a specific one. So it will vary between school to school, what they might look like.
All right. Yeah, the questions we could ask later, but yeah.
Let me see. I'm trying to pull up the Q&As now.
Oh, you took away the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I want to take a pause, see if we're going to do any
Oh,
questions.
some people want to know what prerequisites are valued the most.
So we have a prerequisites. We can pull up the website if we need to go through it. We're pretty clear on our website what those prerequisites are, going through those sciences. So just make sure if you applied in medical school, work with your pre-health advisors and make sure you meet those requirements. We have ones that are required and recommended that are there.
Can you talk about what's the difference between required or recommended?
So required means you definitely need to have those completed and finished before you matriculate to medical school. So say students are graduating in June and they've applied June 2025, or let's say they're in this cycle. So announcements come out generally in April and May, but they have not finished those requirements. So those requirements need to be done or they could rescind your offer because you need to meet those requirements or have them waived. Recommended would be great if you have them, but if you don't, they can't keep you out of the medical school.
Other question is, person has, is it okay to have a lot of hours with clinical experience, like over 1,000, but limited hours of research, about 100?
Again, these are quantitative things. I think it's how you explain your experiences. I think I explained with research what you gain from it, what you're learning from the clinical experience. The amount can matter to some extent, but it's how you translate those experiences, what they look like. I see a question about ties to IE. And so ties to IE can be important, but we want to see your commitment to the inland Southern California. So I'm not from this region. I didn't grow up here. I'm not from Southern California. But when I applied for the position here, it's all about the regional connection. And that's why I actually came to UCR School of Medicine. I've been at, I think, in the introduction, I loved my job at Johns Hopkins, but what I found most meaningful when I was there was investment in the local community that was there. That gave me fulfillment. There was a school right across the street, connecting with those different students and helping them see them progress. I wanted to find a medical school that was invested in the region. Like I said, I'm not from this area, but there is such pride in the Inland Empire. I know we're 60 miles east of LA, and there seems to be a lot of tension on LA County, Orange County, those kind of areas. But it's really this pride that I find in the Inland Empire to be able to be there. So you can have ties, whatever that looks like for you. You can be here, go to UC Riverside, be a transplant from Northern California, other places. But it's your commitment to this region that's really important, that you want to stay here, want to have an impact, and more broadly, the impact of the state of California. So that's where the secondary matters. Know our mission, make sure you articulate your commitment to this region, and demonstrate that you have done that, whether it's your paid experiences, volunteering, the connection that you have made. Let's see if there's other ones.
The other question is, how can your gap years influence your story or the impact flow within these areas?
Well, I think it depends what you do in those. What's part of the story you can tell? What is passion to you? Right? So, if you had to do something, whether you had money or not, what's important to you? So, I mean, I want to give example for some of the students. Like, no matter what they've done, let's say they've traveled to, maybe they're from Southern California or the Inland Empire, and they go out of state. They go to college. There's a pattern of them involved in underserved communities. They come back every summer. They do the same thing. They work with free clinics. They work with maybe Spanish-speaking populations, really look at inequities. During that gap year, you see that same evolution, whether it's a paid position, or they look at something, you just need to be have a job. So maybe it's scribing, but you see that now they have an income. They're working, volunteering at X, Y, and Z to continue that passion. So we want to understand what is important to you and how does that importance translate to your behavior and activity.
You just answered that one. This person wants to know, can I explain a low GPA in my personal statement?
I think so. I think that the idea would be, what happened? What happened? But what I often say to folks, we don't judge you how you got in that spot, but we judge how you respond to it. So when you're struggling, what did you do to look at getting better grades? Did you say, gosh, I realize, so I tease medical students all the time. Their number one answer to solve a problem is, I'm going to power through it. That's not typically a good thing to do in life. You need to surround yourself with people that are going to support you. So one of the hardest things for individuals to do is say, I'm struggling and I need help. That's one of the toughest things to be able to do. So I was working with one of our graduates, just graduated, and he talked about his life story. He talked about, he identified as somebody as Latino. He wasn't expected to do anything other than a vocational job, a mechanic or something like that. But he loved soccer. So as he loved soccer, he said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to a community college. Goes to a community college, plays soccer, like gets injured. Now, well, I guess being a pro soccer player is probably not an option, but he loved science. But he had all these voices telling him, well, you can't be this. I can't do this. And he realized, when he looked in the mirror, could he see himself being anything else than a mechanic or whatever it happens to be? And he began to surround himself with these mentors that said, you are capable. You seem to like science. You seem to like helping people. Take these courses. He said, oh, somebody now invested in that. You can do this. So we have this sort of metaphor of the image of him seeing himself, visualizing being a doctor. More often than not, there's a voice that you can't be a doctor, right? It pushes that picture out, and then the mechanic comes back in. So who is helping you say, no, you can be a doctor? So having more mirrors, more people telling you that you can. So surrounding yourself with the people, but you got to be able to reach out. It could be a mentor, it could be friends, it could be different things. So he knew as he went along to be able to trust different people, to tell these different stories. So as those voices of doubt or negativity came in, they became less and less, but they always come back. And having these people around you reinforce that your goals can be accomplished and you can be what you are. So he graduated last year. He's now a family doc. I mean, nobody believed he could be outside of that community. So it's really making sure when you tell that story, how did you respond? It's not that you're in that situation. What did you do to overcome it? And I think if you have a low GPA, it's also having a faculty member talk about the evolution of your maturity, your eagerness for feedback, your openness to improvement. We know that people that are struggling, the first issue is awareness. I have to tell medical students, we all know when you're struggling, when you're at the bottom. Most people know when you're at the bottom, whatever the bottom is, you're in a bad spot. You go to counseling, you go to therapy. But I always ask medical students, when you're going over that hill and you know you're going down, one, can you recognize it? And two, can you identify 3 coping mechanisms to offset it so that you're going up? And if they can't answer that question, we talk about going to what we call here at UCR, our CAPS, our psychologists, to be able to have conversations, not just when you're at the bottom, but how do you deal with maybe your anxiety? How do you deal with what I call the med school psyche, that you question yourself? How do you overcome those? So often I say, how do you wake up with affirmation? How do you end with affirmation? Sometimes you need more affirmations throughout the day just to counteract some of those negative messages. But how do you go over that hill? If you're in the middle of an exam, you have a panic attack, how do you calm yourself down? Do you take a 10-second and take a breath, hear yourself breathing, recenter yourself, and move forward? And if you start to take a test and you spiral out of control, how do you offset it and stop? So those are skills that you really want to learn. So as you talk about that low GPA, be very clear what you learned from it and how you responded to it. Like I said, usually at UCR School of Medicine, we don't care so much about the low GPA, but how did it shape you as a person? How did it teach you about your character of who you want to be? That's very important to us.
Another question is, do you accept community college students that take in community college prereq classes, or I started at community college?
Yeah, we don't distinguish between where you take them. So we value community college credits as valid as any place. So it's really I think part of that, as many people know in California, it's really the counting of beans. So if you're going from a quarter system to a semester system, that's more of the complication of it. But the value of the content is not questioned by UCR School of Medicine.
Do you want to make a pitch for the California Med Scholars program?
Sure. So UCR School of Medicine is part of the California Medicine Scholars Program. We're a statewide network. There are 4 of us. We have University of California, San Francisco, and Fresno as one of what we call hubs, and they partner with our community colleges and really promote pathway to medicine. UC Davis is one of them, UC San Diego, and UC Riverside. So we have many community colleges that we partner with, trying to support them to get into Cal State San Bernardino and UCR. And so we really value our community college applicants. We have a whole program. I know we have a really trying to recruit folks from community colleges and be able to support them. And because they transition twice, transition from high school to community college to 4 year, those transitions can be difficult. And so be able to support them in all the way through to be able to get the medicine.
And this is the link, so you could apply for it. It's a great program. Question. Does UCR provide medical students with access to free therapy and mental health resources? I think you just stated that you do.
Yeah, in fact, we have a dedicated person. Her name is Amanda Smith, but we have a dedicated office for student wellness. But they don't provide direct therapy. We have our psychological and behavioral health folks that provide therapy, which is free. She provides what we call Thrive check-ins. It's at medical school. And this has to do with just the notion of med school, like how you're processing things, how you're adapting to different pieces. And we try to be very proactive about the adjustment to med school, what that looks like. So it's a required check-in just to understand how you're processing the transition to med school.
Somebody wants to know that they took one of their prereqs during COVID that was pass fail. Should they retake the class?
We really look at the credit level of passing. So I don't think the no pass really will affect it. Unless there's it's really, did you meet the requirement or not? As long as you met the requirement, there's no need to retake it.
Somebody wants to know they've submitted their secondary already. Is there anything they could do to increase their odds for an interview? Should they call you and email you? That's a joke. What should they do to get it? So I would say the worst thing you could do is calling and emailing, but that's just me. But I will let you answer that.
I think once you submitted it, you have to let the application speak for itself. So sometimes, if you are not successful getting in, I'm working with a pre-mel student right now. She's a mentee. She unfortunately, in the first time she applied, did not get in. And she knew me. And I said, why didn't you ask for help or feedback? Once I can provide feedback directly, but I have to recuse myself in reviewing an application to be fair to all applicants. But, once she wasn't in the application, like, why don't we go through and look at your personal statement, be there? And she said, I was so worried about getting feedback. I'm not sure I wanted to hear it. And so she now talks about that in her application, the vulnerability and how difficult it is for help. Now, the first time she went through the application, she got no interviews just by changing it. She wrote her academics, everything, nothing else changed. But how she responded to those secondaries, she's now getting several interviews, both for MDs, and she's also applying to DO. So it's understanding how to articulate, like I said, it's not how you got in the situation, it's how you're responding to that. And her openness, when you write just a generic, like, oh, I'm passionate about underserved communities, and it's very generic, it doesn't tell us about your character and who you are. And that's very important in the application process.
The other thing that I would just throw this out there, and I don't know if don't sit there and compare yourself saying, oh, my friend admitted the application the same day as we did, and they already got a response and I didn't. Like, there is no like machine or system. Like, life doesn't work that way. You have humans that are going through the application. So some things get seen earlier, some things that don't. That's not really good for your mental health, or reading it on blogs or forums and things. Like, that's just the only thing that I would just add.
Yeah, and I do think, comparing yourself can be very challenging. We're very proud that we look holistically, but we get about 6,500 applications for 86, 90 spots. So getting through those applications that are there. But I do think you know, uh, advocating for yourself is always supportive, but you want to do it in a way that's intentional and supportive. Right now, we have to be fair to all applicants. So we don't really accept new information because it's your application. So if we accept it, then we have to start the whole application over again. To be fair and equitable, we take what you submitted on by the deadline and review that. We do sometimes, accept updated elements. So for example, if you're taking a post back, your transcript hasn't come in, you can update that. Those kind of things that can be there. It doesn't harm to provide updates. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to elevate your application. But things like, gosh, I just graduated in August with a post back. My grades weren't posted, and you have a low GPA. I want to make sure they know that I have a strong GPA and I graduate. So we have to be equitable when we review those different things. But what I don't want you to do is regret not submitting something. It doesn't mean it's always evaluated with everything that comes in, but I don't want to discourage you for advocating for yourself either.
Other question is somebody wants to know, uh, is it recommended taking a gap year?
I don't know if recommend is the right word, but I think it matters on your situation. What does it look like? So as I work with pre-health students, you know, can you take the MCAT and be successful with the score that you want during you're taking your undergraduate? Undergrad can be intense. So maybe you need the gap year. So it's really explaining your intentionality of your path to medicine. So gap year or not, some people come right out of undergraduate. Sometimes people need life experiences. I think I want to be a doctor. Let me go test it out. I'm going to go apply for this job. So it's not a yes or no. It depends on your circumstance and why you want to do it.
And some people need to take some time off to pay debt, or if they have, student debt, or they just need to support their family, or there's hundreds of reasons. Um,
Yeah, we just had a couple years ago, we had a graduate. He was a nurse for 10 years. He started a family, he built an income, and then he realized after 10 years, he had the financial capacity, the family stability. His kids were old enough to be in school. He came back to med school and graduated after 10 years of being a nurse. So it all depends on your sequence and situations where you are.
um, this person wants to know, how does W's on your transcript look for medical school?
It doesn't really matter a whole lot to us. It's making sure as long as you meet the prereqs that are there. So um, we want to make sure that you meet those. It could have an impact on your. It actually doesn't have an impact on your GPA, but we don't really look at W's. I think as long as you meet your academics. Sometimes, however, I will caveat. Sometimes students that take a lot of W's have a correlation to other things. And that's the pattern that we look for is that, gosh, you take a lot of W's, and then medicine's all about patterns. So that's like the great trends. If you have a lot of W's, we want to understand, do you understand what's going on? And did you fix it? It's like I mentioned, how did you respond to that element? Now, if it's just one, it's really an outlier. But if you're doing it frequently, there's probably something else going on. And what does that mean? Were you open and honest about what that is? How did you move forward with it?
Other question is, how many letters of recommendation should I have to make sure it's not too many or too little?
We require 3 recommendation letters. So you need to meet the minimum. We certainly accept, I think up to 5 is what I believe we do, but you certainly got to meet the minimum for the recommendation letters.
And that's why the MSAR is really important because some schools require 5. So make sure you know and look at what is required because every school will have a different requirement.
Yeah,
Um,
sometimes a committee letter will act as a single one. So you can have a committee letter that encompasses everything, and that's accepted as a full set of letters.
somebody wants to know, is applying early beneficial?
I'm sure if you use this website that we never like to reference, like Reddit and other things, I think you hear a lot of notion that they can be beneficial. But for UCR School of Medicine, we take very seriously our application, to review every application. So we understand that different applicants have different situations where when the application opens up in May, June, they may not be able to put it in. And so our application deadline, everybody gets a fair and equitable review as long as you submit by the deadline. What it may mean, I think the earlier thing is you're waiting. The waiting may be very, very different when you submit it. But the way that just medical schools work, so you have pools that are if you're rolling deadlines. So the way rolling deadlines look, so an admission committee will review applications. There's often some sort of score that's given, and then you have that strength of that particular group of individuals. So say the score is from 1 to 10. And in that score, they get, there's 2 out of the 30 that get 10s. It's likely the 10s will be competitive at the full list. So the 10s will get admitted to the med school. The other ones got to wait. So by the end of the admission cycle, if you have a score from 1 to 10, the line in which drawn, every above that line must get in. It's judging the pools each way. So sometimes at the beginning, you have the pool and say you have 3 10s. Now you get to the end, you have 3 10s as well. Those 10s at the end and the beginning are the same value. It doesn't matter where they are. So at the end, they'll come out. Now, if you have one that doesn't have rolling deadlines, so by requirement, by traffic rules, by March 15th, medical schools must admit their class size. That is a requirement. So our class size right now is 86. We must admit that number. So some schools wait to the very end. They take from ranking from 1 to 86, and those are admitted. We do rolling. So our goal is to kind of pick people along the way. And eventually when we get to March 15th, have 86 of them. So the pools are evaluated at the time that they are, but they're equally valued at the time that they are. So if you do it at the end of the cycle, the main concern is that you're waiting much longer for your application to be reviewed, likely.
People want to know, so do you guys enter how many, so 86 spots, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other question is what are so this is what is your opinion on academic enhancer pre-med post-bac programs?
I'm not sure I understand the intent of the question. What I'll say is we understand everybody has a different academic journey. I think what's most important to understand, if you feel like your academic preparedness is not reflective of your capability, you need to demonstrate to the medical school of your capability. And one way to do that, say you have a science GPA, be biology, chemistry, math, and physics of, I don't know, say 2.5. And say you had a death in the family, say that you weren't ready, you weren't mature enough. There are all sorts of reasons why that grade might not be there. Then you take a post-bac. You take an intensive post-bac that has a lot of those science classes there. You then take 40 of those credits and you get a 4.0. That's very important. Now, some people try to sidestep the post-bac and say, I'm going to do 40 credits, but I'm going to be in the humanities. Now, that doesn't demonstrate you can do the scientific element of medical school. So we understand that different people develop and mature at different rates. And so understanding what that looks like and how it fits in. Now, it's really important. Depending how low your science GPA and undergraduate was, matters how many credits potentially that you take at the post-bac level. So we want to understand, are you ready both mentally, emotionally, intellectually, for medical school, and sometimes that postbac allows. So if you only take like 12 credits and you have a low GPA in undergrad, they may not tell the story that you are actually ready, what that looks like. So you want to be intentional, because there's sometimes do it your own, where you're only doing like 3 credits, 4 credits there. So I think depending on your situation, enrolling in a intensive one can be important to be able to justify or communicate that you are ready to enter medical school. And again, in your personal statement, you might want to talk about the evolution of your own maturity and embracing some of your weaknesses and overcoming them, and say like, gosh, this weakness is now becoming a strength. I really leaned in to asking for help. I've surrounded myself with X, Y, and Z. I've now lifted myself out and not afraid to really get feedback. I've leaned into that, being vulnerable to folks. And, imposter syndrome is real. There are a lot of times where I am even in my position, I think, gosh, did they hire the right person? And you have to surround yourself with people that really say, yeah, you're doing the right things, and having that positive reinforcement.
The only thing that I would just add is like some of those post-bac programs are really expensive and you can't qualify for financial aid. So it's a big financial burden. So don't feel that you have to do it. If it's going to come down between, putting food in your stomach and a roof over your head versus, so, like you, and then you just have to explain it. Like, some people are fortunate that have that kind of support, but some folks don't. So,
Yeah, and
don't
what we've
don't
done
don't think of it as an absolute.
yeah, I agree with that. And what we've done at UCR School of Medicine is made our postbac a degree seeking, degree giving piece where we get a master's degree. So then you're eligible for financial aid and different things. So we've integrated into to help. So even if you don't apply to med school, you have an employable master's degree that you walk away with that could really lift you up. So I think we've tried to really think about thoughtfully about the range of situation for students, and that's why we made it a degree granting postbac that I think some other programs don't have.
Yeah, that's kind of like a big one. In regards to GPA, does each school have their own cutoff, or does MCAS have a national cutoff?
There's no national cutoff. Different schools, we don't have a GPA cutoff. The only one that we have is for our early assurance program. That's the 3.4. But we like to think about diamonds in the rough. You want to really, we want to understand who you are as a character. You have that grit, that resilience, and are you open about it? And can you lean into asking for help, getting that advice? So we really want to see how you've done that. As I mentioned several times, it's your character, how you respond to adversity. If you struggled with academics, how did you respond to it? That's what we're really looking at. And so we don't have a minimum GPA. That way we can go back and say, let's understand the life story. What's their evolution of their identity in this academic setting? What does that look like? So we don't want to artificially create a GPA that weeds out somebody. So that's why we're very proud that we look at every application that comes in. As long as you submit a secondary, we look at your application.
So this is a much, much longer discussion, but this is how do you deal with imposter syndrome? Because I have peers that have much better GPA or have done more extracurricular activities. And I think we talked about that a little bit because like you got to live your truth, man. You can't, um, yes, it's just like, when I show up to the gym, there's going to be somebody that's going to lift more weights than me. There's somebody that's going to be, when I go out, there's somebody better looking than me. And that's just life. Like you can't compare yourself to other people. You just got to be able to do the best that you have. But pre-meds get involved in this whole thing of like, oh my God, like this person has X, I have Y. Why don't I have this? And it's like everybody, like, everybody's born differently, and has different opportunities and talents and you know.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, as I told before, when you go over that hill, when you start hearing the voices that I I'm not, should be, I'm lesser than, whatever the voices are. What are your coping mechanisms? What do you do when you go over that hill? You need to learn those skills. And the more that you build that community around you, the lesser those voices come in. But that voice, no matter where you are in life, that voice comes all the time. How do you push it away? Does it come a lot? But it's embracing, understanding what it means to you and how it impacts you, and understanding you talk to somebody. So when you hear it, how does it make you feel? So that's why I tell students. I tell one student who had imposter syndrome. How do you affirm yourself? So, many people when they're getting up in the morning, getting ready, there's a mirror somewhere in their routine. So I had the student put a note in that mirror. They put doctor, their name, and the specialty they want to be at. Now, this particular student was really struggling with things during residency. They only got 4 interviews. I kept saying, it only takes 1 to match. It only takes 1. You got 4. That's a good percentage. She said that message on the mirror every morning reminded her that she could do it. So having those messages, whenever you have imposter syndrome, you need to counteract it with, say, if you have 1 negative message, you need 4 positive messages. How do you cope with it? How do you sit back? How do you address it? The story I told you about the student that was trying to be, everybody said he's going to be a mechanic. He learned, and when he looked in the mirror, if he didn't see that he was going to be a physician, he had to surround himself around people that would tell him, no, you are going to be a physician. So reaching out to the folks that can reinforce that. Being comfortable, letting you know, hey, today was a tough day. I don't think I can make it as a physician. Having said no. And I've actually done that with medical students. They have negative questions. They have negative language. Said, I'm going to stop you right there. Let's talk about being positive. I need to hear that you will achieve this. You will do that because it starts with you. And they kind of look at me funny. Said, if you don't believe it, nobody else can believe. So having somebody being honest and open and you being willing to do that, that can be very important to have those people around you as you get that negative messaging in there. You need to counteract it. Now, theoretically, as you move forward, that you have less and less of that voice, but no matter where you are, that voice comes back. I think Joe and talk about even his own experience. The voice comes back. Different settings. No matter where in my career, I question myself as well. And I got to surround myself, hey, I'm going to call this person. I'm struggling today. And, they give me a pep talk and you pick yourself up off the ground and just remembering all the good things you've done, all the goals you achieved. It's changing the narrative around. So having those skill sets.
Somebody wants to know what's the deadline for secondaries, and I would just probably ask, what is the best time to return your secondaries after you get them?
I believe December 1st is the deadline for secondaries, I believe. We don't pressure students in submitting them right away. So some schools say, hey, submit in 2 weeks. I think my advice to anybody with their secondaries, be intentional how you respond to them. We want to really know who you are based on those questions. So take your time, fill them out. Like I said before, the later you submit it, maybe more difficult for you just because you have to wait a little bit longer to get a response. I mean, that's the most difficult thing, but don't rush your responses because secondaries are so important to understand how you are interested in our medical school.
And don't make a mistake. Don't put UCI School of Medicine when you're doing a secondary for UCR School. Just throwing that out there. Somebody wants to ask, will UCR be increasing the 86% class size in the upcoming school year?
We certainly can. I think one of the biggest parts of it, so from our accreditation process, we can accept 10% more than our class. So if we have 86, we can accept up to 8. So it'll be, 94? So we could go up to 94 by our accreditation. We cannot go above that without accreditation approval. So We right now have flexibility going all the way up to 80 or 94 if we need be. So if we have a strong class, we can certainly do that. The minimum we would do would be 86.
And as a public institution, don't you need to have public support or permission or funding? But
Not necessarily, it's all driven by what we call accreditation. So uh, the number, there's certainly some political natures of our class in terms of like finances and agreement to different things. But right now, our accreditation sets the baseline of the minimum number of students we need to admit, which is 86.
this person wants to know if you have a disability, would it be disadvantaged to mention them even though you overcame it for the most part, even though it might show growth and resilience, I worry that it might think that it might affect my performance as a doctor.
I mean, I would certainly lean into it and explain how that's engaged you and build the support that's there. So the ADA for medical school, they're kind of the main thing for ADA, and we have technical standards, which allows what we call equal opportunity to access our curriculum. Regardless of what your disability is, our responsibility is to give you equal access to our curriculum. So I wouldn't worry about explaining what your disability may or may not be. Actually, I like to use the word diversibility. It's the term I like to use because everybody has diversibility. It doesn't matter what that looks like. And that actually brings innovation. My story that I tell when I was at Hopkins, I was working with a group of individuals that had some hearing impairments. And it's very common now since the pandemic where you wear a mask. But when you're in a medical setting and you have a mask that you can't see somebody's mouth, somebody that's hearing impaired, where it's an older person that may have a hearing aid, or whatever it may be, not seeing the mouth can really inhibit the communication process. So what they did was called, and you can actually look it up, they created a company called Clear Masks. They did it right before the pandemic, and they actually got FDA approval to put it into clinical settings right before the pandemic. So you have these clear masks that are there. But me as a hearing person, I would have never thought about that because I don't depend so much on seeing the mouth. So I would really articulate about the agenda, the innovation that comes with that is super cool. I think they created their own company. I talked to, it had been a long time. I saw that doing excellent. I talked to them and doing fabulous. Tired as a CEO, a startup company, but doing amazing, creating clear mass in the medical industry. So those things can be very positive. So I would just look at our technical standards. Those are our baseline activities that provide equal opportunity for students to access our curriculum and demonstrate their capability to meet our objectives.
I could state that my primary care doctor is deaf and has a translator with him, and he was able to go through medical school and residency. And I think he's a damn great physician. That's why I go to him. So yeah, and I think yeah, and from one of the things I've heard is not disability, but it's your ability, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
that's like I'd love to do a national campaign called diversibility because everybody has a range of abilities. It doesn't matter, labeling one or the other. I think every diverse ability we have, everybody has different ability. Like for people that love the Dodgers, that everybody can pitch in that piece. We all have a role to play from the management, right? You have an ability that can contribute to the Dodgers' success in different ways. So not everybody can be the star pitcher, the star home run hitter, but we all have different abilities that can contribute to the success of a team.
yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I think everybody like I would just say from like our organization, I don't know how to make a website and I don't know how to do flyers and I'm not talented and I don't know social media, but there's people in our group that are really good at that and so you have people that bring in different talents it's not so much a disability, but it's talents that bring in. And I think some, people that have those disabilities could also relate with their patients. Like I know a orthopedic resident who's dyslexic, and so for him, he has to mark certain things and has different things to do. And I think that brings great awareness of struggles that other people have. Um, yeah, we're actually doing a session next spring on disability, and we bringing physicians who are, have various limitations, but have excelled in what they do. So, um, the other part of it too, this is a person wants to know if they ended up with their undergrad with a 3.25 GPA and a strong MCAT and strong extra, what are their chances of getting in the medical school? And it's just like,
I mean, honest answer, I don't know. We have to look holistically at your application, but with those metrics, they sound positive, but I don't know overall. We look at your commitment. Nowhere in there. If I had asked the question, what is your commitment to the Inland Empire, and what is your demonstration of that?
um, somebody wants to know if UCR School of Medicine has accelerated 3-year programs.
We do not.
I think the only one is Davis, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I know there are common. A lot of times they will have people that have a strong, like a PhD, will be able to do that. We certainly are looking to explore to reduce the cost of medical education, but right now we don't have an accelerated program.
People want to know what uh, how to prepare for medical school interviews and multiple MMI interviews.
I definitely think talk to your pre-health advisor. I think there's questions out there of how to respond. It's interesting. Part of the MMI, the design of it. There's 8 stations, and ours has 12 stations. 4 stations that are not evaluated are 2 rest stations and 2 opportunities to talk to medical students and just have a conversation. So you have 8 stations. The design of an MMI is so that one interview does not tank you. So if you have a dilemma question that you get and you don't do very well on it, it doesn't reflect your overall performance, right? So that's an outlier. So that's the design of the MMI. But what you have to practice is being able to respond to different dilemmas and being comfortable with that. There's no right or wrong answer. It's being comfortable and trusting yourself that you can respond to these different elements. And part of that trust and confidence is practicing them. So come in with different dilemmas. There's a lot of different databases that give you different dilemmas that you can respond to. So that would be the main thing. Facilitating, you have a prompt, have a certain amount of time to look at the prompt and to be able to respond to them, and getting feedback from a person, how you responded to those different questions. So that would be the best way to prep, is understand the format and then just practice that format and getting feedback from somebody.
I would say we have in a couple of weeks, Dr. Campo is doing a whole talk on interviewing for medical schools and MMI. So I would say, making a plug, um, check our website, it's posted. Um, People want to know, I can't find it on the website, but where is for the training sites? I'm trying to look at that and I'll put that in there. Um, want to know about financial aid and tuition support.
So we have something called missions scholarships that are there. These provide full tuition and fees support, but the idea is that you are committed to come back to serve in the Inland Empire. If you do decide not to come back, they actually turn into loans, at a good interest rate. But if you come back, they come grants. You don't have to pay them back. So if as long as you're committed to this area, we have 2 and 4 year ones that are there that provide that. And the 2 years one is because sometimes we tie them to our shortage areas and our primary care areas. So If you're in dermatology, ophthalmology, they don't necessarily fit into those categories, but we want to look at, family medicine, psychiatry, OB-GYN, those kind of areas. So if you come back, you're fully paid through medical school. You go to residency, you come back and make your service, and they are loan forgiven. If you decide to go somewhere else, it becomes a loan. So we have a lot of great programs to really support our mission to serve our community and come back and stay in this area. So we have a lot of those mission scholars. I believe 85% of our students get financial aid. We offer many of those mission scholars over each year for students to offset their cost of medical education.
Um, Sorry. And then somebody wants just can you repeat that? I'm gonna put it in there. How do you balance work and studying for the MCAT?
I think it's all about the individual. So you have to be very honest about who you are. So I tell our medical students there's 4 ingredients to be successful in a standardized long-term high-stakes exam. There is confidence, endurance, efficiency, and intellectual capability. So those are the 4 things I have to ask students. Now, the number one thing that comes up is the word confidence. Now, how do you develop that confidence? The endurance, the emotional fortitude. And that's where sometimes when you're in the middle of an exam and you say like, oh, I'm lost, I don't know what to do, and you spiral out of control. So understanding the four elements, what that looks like. Now the balance is very unique to each individual. So I don't know, are you in an environment that has some financial capacity, or do you have to work? Do you have to go to school? This is where outlining, understanding yourself, understanding your limits, and what will be there. Often we tell medical students, I saw an early question about wellness and balance. We often tell, I'm working with a medical student now. She lives at home, which is a great because it's very affordable, but you have to have honest conversation about your family around boundary setting. I don't know what that looks like for different families. Say you're studying, I can't be interrupted. Sometimes parents, if they don't know the medical school route, they may not understand. Maybe there's some tutoring that you have to do for your siblings. So really having an honest conversation, creating a home environment, a study environment with boundaries. Like I'm going to study, I'm going to get up, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I can't be bothered from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. without any interruption. So really having that boundary setting, having conversation about that. I think also being comfortable saying no. I'm not able to do this. We need to find another solution. I remember I was very impressed with our California Medicine Scholars Program. We were interviewing a student for community college, and his father is a mechanic. I know construction. His struggle was that he as the son, had lots of responsibility with the family, both the construction and taking his younger siblings to some places. I was most impressed. He said he had to have a conversation with his father. My priority is getting academics. We need to brainstorm how we can work together to get the siblings to where they are without compromising my academics. Now, I'll tell you, my father, I was very scared of my father. I don't think I could have that conversation with my father, say, hey, I am not going to do what you're going to say. I was very impressed with this individual. Let's have an honest conversation about my boundaries and how could we mutually come up with the solution. So it's really having those very honest, genuine conversations with your family dynamic, creating the boundaries, what's healthy for you, and making sure you can achieve your goals.
I'm trying to find where all the training sites and I can't find it. I don't know.
I think
So
I have it. I think we're
it's
coming close to the end too. Let me see if I can
yeah,
find.
yep. And yeah, I was gonna ask one last question. Two last questions. Yeah, if you could just put that in there. I couldn't find it. I looked for it everywhere and I couldn't find it. The one more question is, how important is physician shadowing? And is it valued over research volunteer? Um,
I think it's very similar to the clinical exposure component to it. It's
yep.
really about, do you understand what you're getting into and translate it. So we don't judge the type, but we want to understand, do you understand the clinical environment, and do you understand that you are going to be a physician and how it's different than other professions?
And then the last question is, what is an advice you give to pre-med students that are interested in UCR School of Medicine? What is the secret sauce or secret thing they need to have?
I think pay attention to our mission. You got to really align with our mission. We really care deeply. You ask any staff person, faculty, student, it's all about our mission. So you got to really align with our mission. We definitely want to make sure that you are going to be successful, but it's our mission is first, always forefront.
Alrighty. Well, I'm actually in a closet, so I need to get out. Um, I will let everyone go. Somebody asked about the quiz. Yes, it will be posted in a few minutes. It usually takes like a couple hours for them to write the quiz because there are also people in the session that are writing the quiz. So it usually takes them a little bit of time to write it. Thank you again for making time for us, Dr. Teraguchi. Appreciate it. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. And I just tell everyone to go vote, 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 vote. All right. Thank you.
Take care. Have a good weekend.
Bye bye.